I am Mayra Downs. I grew up in the city of Logan, Utah, and today I'm going to be talking about how I kind of grew up and the struggles I went through and how I was able to finally, at the age of 15, come out of that and do better and be better. I grew up with a very traditional Hispanic family. My mother was a little bit Catholic, but she practiced paganism. Four other siblings, and they were all male. My brothers all have a different dad than me, but we all grew up with their dad being our father. My mother had an affair and had me as a result. That was never really an issue growing up because I viewed my brother's dad as my dad. My mom started to have abusive tendencies at a really, really young age, as far back as I can remember. I think the fact that I was a result of her affair caused so many marital issues, so in a way blamed me because I was the result of it. And so she took her anger out on me a lot. My mother at one point got very violent with my father. I just know I was between the ages of 5 and 7 when my mother one of the times that she went to jail. She went to jail for a domestic dispute and was gone for quite a while. I can't exactly remember how long. While she was gone is when my life really started to change for the worse. While my mother was gone, my father was, and while she was gone, he got one night and I was sleeping. I decided to sleep in his bed with him because I always did that when my mom was home. I remember waking up one morning to him pulling down my pants, and I could just smell in his breath and on his sweat and like his skin. He just reeked. I remember kind of like jolting up really quick and feeling weird about it. So when he went into the bathroom, I just ran out of the room really quick. And I didn't think anything of it. I just felt kind of weird about it, but I didn't think much of it. I was really young. Until the next night, he came in my room again. And the details get a little blurry because I think I've blocked out a lot of this trauma. It wasn't very long until my father did end up coming into my room and assaulting me again, but this was one of the worst nights he had ever. It had been a lot of touching up until this night. I can't remember exactly the details. I just do remember him forcing things in me and just touching me and doing everything he could. And I remember waking up that morning because I went to sleep after. I woke up and it hurt to walk. It hurt to get up and walk to the bathroom. That was really like the first time that I felt so much betrayal and disappointment. Every time my father would assault me, I would close my eyes super, super tight and pretend as if I was asleep. So that way he didn't know that I was awake because I was just afraid to open them. For some reason, I thought opening my eyes would make the situation worse. The next mornings were just like any other day, like that night before, just never happened. And of course I was a child, so I never brought it up. I was super confused and things just got worse until my mother finally came out of jail and he finally stopped. I know I was either 6 or 7 the first time. So as soon as my mom got home from jail, it stopped completely. There was a few times where I was afraid that he would do it again, given the chance, but he never really did. When my mom got out of jail, I didn't even think to tell her. I think at a really young age, I kind of always knew that my mother's reaction wasn't going to be a normal mother's reaction to this. I knew that my mother wasn't going to comfort me. I think a part of me knew that she would make it about herself. As I got older, the abuse towards me started to really start happening, and my mother's hatred towards me, or jealousy. I'm not really sure exactly what it was or why she was just so resentful over me. I do think a huge part of it is the fact that I'm not my father's daughter. But there was another time where I was being assaulted by one of my older siblings, and my mother had walked in on us. And I remember her reaction. She was just shocked. I think she just didn't really know how to handle the situation, but she didn't really do much. When my dad got home from work, she forced me to tell him all the details after, he had he himself had assaulted me. So he didn't really care. He didn't react. He was just like, oh, that happened? Okay. My mother would always accuse me of sleeping with all my guy friends. Like I would go to the skate park and I would come home and she'd be like, oh, are you done sleeping with all those boys? And then as I got older, I was about 11, maybe younger. I think I had just turned 11. I think my birthday was like literally just right around the corner. And another one of my siblings assaulted me. This time my mom didn't know about it. To this day, I don't think she knows about it. But of course, she was like the least person I thought about to tell. Like I just wasn't going to tell my mother. She wasn't going to do anything about it. So what was the point? So then by the time that happened, a year after my second brother assaulted me, I finally, it was just one day. I don't really know what triggered me, but I know that my father had got me super upset. So I finally had the courage to tell my mother that my dad did assault me. Went into my room, which was a closet, and I sat on my bed and I was thinking and trying to encourage myself to finally tell her that this was the time, and if it's not right now, then I probably should never tell her, because if I can't do it right now, then there's no point. I get out of my room and I walk into the room that she's in with my siblings, and they're all watching TV, and I'm crying, and my mom goes, what's wrong with you? I just blank out, just say it. I'm just like, Dad raped me. And she just sits there, she's just sitting there, and she goes, what? And I'm like, Dad raped me. And my father comes in, because he hears it from the other room, and he comes in and he's like, what are you talking about? And he's very obviously nervous. Like he's skipping over his words. He's like jittery, like he's very clearly guilty, but he's like, what are you talking about? Why are you saying that? And my mother goes, what do you mean? And I'm like, he touched me. Like he's touched me before. My oldest brother was the only one who was paying attention to this. And he goes, why are you lying? I just completely ignore him. And I look at my mother and I tell her again, he touched me. And so she takes me into the bathroom and she goes, where did he touch you? And I didn't want to relive that trauma. So I just said, he touched me. I didn't give her any details. I didn't give her any of it. And she just didn't do anything. We went into her room. And I was sitting on the bed and I was sobbing at this point, and she was sitting next to me, and my father comes in and he starts crying and he goes, can you forgive me? And admits in front of my mother that he did in fact rape me. And he was on his knees and he was begging me to forgive him, but I was just sobbing. So nothing came out. I couldn't even say yes. I couldn't say no. And before I could even say anything, he was like, it's okay. If you don't forgive me, God will. And then that was another time that I was just so disappointed in God, because I was like, what do you mean? Like he can forgive you, but he couldn't stop you that night? Just that one night that I asked for some peace and sleep? Like that's insane. And then I think about a couple years later, because the next day nothing happened. The next day she slept with him that same night. And we went to the thrift store the next day. My dad bought me everything I wanted, almost in a way to almost like undo what he did, as if that was going to make a difference. We just went about our lives. Nothing ever came of it. But my parents were still very abusive towards each other. And then I think the abuse towards me really started to kick in gear from my mother. Whenever they would argue and fight, she would be like, remember what you did to the girl? She would always throw it in his face. And she would force me to go into the room with them and talk about the abuse. I would sit there and I'd cry, but she started to get really, really abusive. And my mother was always abusive. I can't remember how old I was, but one of the earliest memories I have of my mother is her throwing a remote at my face and breaking my tooth in half because I was laughing and running around with my little brother. And she wanted me to shut up, so she threw the remote at my face. Another time, I didn't grab a hairband fast enough for her to do my hair, so she smacked me in the back of the head as hard as she could with the brush. There was another time where she was kicking me out of her home, and I said, okay, like I'll pack my stuff and I'll leave, because I had a place to stay. So I packed all my things and I was about to get ready to leave, and my mother stopped me and she was like, what are you doing? And I looked at her and I said, I'm leaving. And she was like, no, you're not. And I was sitting down when this was happening, and she just starts beating me senseless. Like she's hitting me in the face, she's beating me in the stomach, my arms, my legs. She's just punching me everywhere that she could just land a punch. She got me really good. I did end up going to school the next day with bruises all over my face. I found out that my brother's dad wasn't my real father when I was like in 3rd grade, I want to say. And it didn't really come as a shock to me. I really didn't care. At this point, he had already assaulted me, so a few of my feelings for him as a father died just a while back. And so when my mother was finally like, hey, like, so-and-so isn't your real your father. I found your real father, and he wants to get to know you. I was like, okay, cool. I don't really care. I don't really care to get to know my biological father either. The abuse just kept getting worse. Not ever at one point did it get better. There was never a moment where things were okay. Things just, like, as the years went by, things were just worse and worse. Like, she was just more comfortable with putting her hands on me. She was more comfortable belittling me, abusing me verbally and mentally. So after I had the courage to tell my mother that he assaulted me, a year or 2 later, she finally divorced him. But it wasn't because he was abusive. It wasn't because he assaulted me. It was because she found another man that she wanted to marry. And so she found this boyfriend, and she then really became neglectful. We were living on our own. It was just my mother and my siblings. And she started seeing this guy, and she would send my brothers to their dad's house for months on end. I remember she sent them over there for the whole summer one time, and because I wasn't his, I wasn't sent over there. Not because he assaulted me, but because I wasn't his biological daughter. And while my brothers were with their dad and I was with my mom, she would be gone for days. And at this point, I was like 13, 14, and she'd be gone for days, sleeping over at her new boyfriend's house. And I had nothing to eat. I had no curfew, so I was coming home at like 7 in the morning. I'd leave at like 5 and come home at 7 in the morning. And at this point, I started dating. I was dating guys, and they were significantly older than me. I was dating this 16-year-old when I was about 12, 13, and I would go see him when my mom would be gone for days because there was no one to tell me no. I would come home with hickeys on my neck, and my mother would get upset, but then she'd be like, oh, whatever. It's fine. Like, I'm doing the same thing you are. She was neglectful, but she was also very inappropriate. And because I was out here dating guys that were so much older than me, using me for sex, and I was just a child. I wasn't even fully a teenager yet. After this, we moved in with her boyfriend, and we moved to Lewiston. It's pretty far from Logan. It's about an hour drive, and it's in the middle of nowhere. There's no convenience store. There's no mall. And at this point, I was in my freshman year. I was 14, and I was so depressed. I starved myself every day. I would go 3 days without eating sometimes. And then when I would eat a meal, I would throw it all up because my body just couldn't handle having a meal with so much calories. And because I was just so depressed, I couldn't eat. I would go to school once, maybe twice a week. I made it a habit to cross the street when I would get to school, to not look both ways, hoping I would get hit by a car. But one day I had just turned 15, and I was walking to school, and I was thinking about how much I wanted to end my life. Then something in my head just clicked, and I was like, but there's other ways. I don't have to live like this. Like, I'm right. I don't have to live like this, but I don't have to die. I remember thinking about every possibility. I was like, okay, so what can I do to get out of this? I finally, somehow, I don't know, the universe was just really on my side this day, but I convinced my mother to take me to therapy. In therapy, of course, my therapist asks if I've ever been assaulted or abused in any shape, way, or form, and it was on a piece of paper, and I remember marking yes for every single form of abuse. And he was a mandated reporter. I didn't know that at the time, and he said he had to report this. And I remember thinking, oh my god, my mother's going to beat the living out of me as soon as she finds out. But I'm ready for it. I'm ready to take the blows. Like, she had beat me up before. Like, it wasn't anything new. I kind of expected it. So I was like, I'm ready for whatever comes. I have nothing to lose. And so then they reported it. The Child Justice System Center in Logan called my mother a few days later and said, hey, your daughter is saying that she's been sexually abused. Do you know about this? My mother said yes. She admitted to knowing about it. And they were like, well, don't you want to report it? And she was like, yeah, sure, I can report it. The night before this meeting, my mother she gets really upset with me over something really small. I didn't close her door the way she wanted me to close it. So she comes into my room and she's screaming her head off. She's yelling at me. She's like, you don't do anything. You don't help me with the kids, which was a lie. I always helped her with the kids. And she's just like belittling me. And she goes, tomorrow when we go talk to the investigator, I want you to tell them you want a different family. And if you decide that you don't want a different family and you stay with me, I'm going to make your life a living hell. And I just remember thinking, it's already hell. Like, what do you mean? I'm already miserable. I hate my life. I hate waking up to you. I hate waking up in this room that was a boiler room attached to her house. It was a shed in this. So I was like, okay, I'm doing it. And so the next day we go and we're there again for the sexual abuse by my father. And they go, well, since there's no proof because it happened so long ago, are you willing to make a phone call and have him admit to the abuse that he did to you? And I remember thinking, hell no. I haven't spoken to this man in 3 years. And they go, okay, like, it's fine. Like, that is up to you. And then I was like, well, do you guys know anything about the foster system? Because I'm really looking forward to getting into that because I need to get out of my situation now. I just was like, because my mom is also abusing me. Like, I didn't just get abused by my father. My mother was also abusing me, and she still currently abuses me. She had asked if I had any proof of bruises or anything, and I said no, I didn't, because I didn't think to take pictures of the abuse. And unfortunately, she was like, then I can't remove you. There's no proof, so we can't do anything about it. The caseworker, luckily, again, the universe was on my side during this moment of my life because she took me serious from the very beginning. She just saw something in me and knew that I wasn't lying, and she did everything in her power to make sure I did not go home that night. And sure enough, I didn't. I never went back. So I end up in DT because they didn't have a foster home that was available at the time, and I stayed there for almost a whole month. I was actually looking forward to what the next day was going to bring. It was super scary. It was very scary for weeks. I think I even developed IBS because of it all. Like, I was just so nervous all the time. They were like, okay, well, this is what it's gonna look like. Like, you're gonna have to be here for a while until we can find you a home. But unfortunately, I wasn't a ward of the state just yet because my mother, they couldn't take her rights away since, again, there was no proof of the abuse. So she still had half her rights over me. Then one day my caseworker shows up and she goes, your mother did give up half her rights. And even though I wanted to be away from my mom, and even though she was just this horrible human being, I've never experienced so much heartbreak before because she was my mom. And I knew she was horrible, but like, she was my mother. And what kind of mom gives up on her children? She just willingly handed over her rights. And she didn't even fight for them. She was just like, no problem, here you go. But at the same time, I was so relieved. So it was a really weird and confusing feeling. I was happy, but I was so devastated. But I knew it was for the better. I finally, after a month of being in DT, I hear back from my permanent caseworker that they found a home out in Lewiston, and I had specifically asked them I did not want to be placed in the same town that my mother was going to be in case I ever ran into her, but it was the only home they could find. So I gave in because the family seemed like they were a really nice family. And so I go with them. I don't know how they passed a background check, but my foster dad was a predator. I don't know if he served jail time for this, but he got suspended from his teaching job at a high school because he was caught sleeping with a prior student from the year before in his classroom. It wasn't until a year into living with them that they officially finally did get a divorce. But within that year that they were still together, my foster dad ended up grooming me and was also trying to see how far he could get with me. He would come into my room at night and he would place his hand on my thigh, and every single night it would get like a little higher up, or he knew that I had really bad PTSD to the point where I would just jolt whenever somebody would even brush up next to me, and he would purposely come up from behind me and grab my shoulder or grab my lower back or grab my arm, knowing that it startled me really bad. But I think it was his way of seeing how far he could get with me. I think he finally realized that he wouldn't have been able to get very far because he ended up stopping those behaviors. He just groomed me until they brought in another foster girl who was exactly my age, and he ended up taking things further with her and spent time in jail, but for only 7 days. They officially got a divorce. The wife moved out, and I went with her and her biological daughter, and she just ends up, oh my gosh, just being the exact same way my mother was. Just very manipulative, just pathetic of a woman. It was just insane. I stayed with her for about another year after a failed adoption. She wanted to adopt me, but she was too stingy with her money, and so she was like, I can't keep you, which was fine because I wasn't very fond of her after that whole situation to begin with. I just knew I needed to stay there because I could potentially go somewhere worse, so I'll just stay put with where I'm at because it's still better than what I was leaving. Finally, I move homes again, and I'm with a new lady, and this time we moved out of Lewiston, and we were basically back in Logan. I wouldn't really necessarily say things were okay for a while because almost right off the bat, she expected me to be part of the family. She expected me to treat her like she was my mother. She expected me to like view them as my family, her kids as my siblings, and I just was like, I cannot. I already have a family and I'm not with them for a reason. Like, I already have a mother. You're not going to ever be my mother. And she was also very controlling and very manipulative. Like, we did have our moments where things were okay, and I really, really enjoyed our conversations and the advice she would give me, but also part of me felt like she expected me to get on my hands and knees and kiss her feet for saving my life. I think she just had her own issues that she needed to deal with, and I just don't think she was the best fit for a foster mom. So then again, I end up moving foster homes again, and I meet these new parents, and right off the bat, I'm like, hey, listen, I don't want to get attached. I'm not going to get attached. I'm not looking to get adopted. I'm almost 18 at this point, and I want to get at it, the situation, but I legally can't, so I just need a place to stay. During this time, I was also dating my long-term ex-boyfriend. He was finally my age. He was finally someone closer to my age, and it was a very abusive, toxic situation. I was with him for almost 4 years. It was very, very abusive. And after just a few months, they were the most sweetest people I have ever met. They were so caring and so patient. They didn't really know how to handle me. I was one of their very first foster kids, if not their very first foster kid, navigating that. And I was 17, so I was older, and I had my own car, I had my own phone, I had a job, I was very responsible, I was super independent, and I almost instantly kind of fell in love with them. I was just like, oh my gosh, you guys are, I think, exactly what I need. You guys are so patient with me. I think I do want to be adopted, but I'm almost 18 and I prefer to age out of the system, and then you can adopt me as an adult. And so that's what we agreed on, and they adopted me. And that's really when things took a huge turn for me and made me really open up to her as my mother. Like, she is who I view as my mom today. That's when I was like, okay, I need to do better. Like, I got myself out of a situation. I can do it again. So I finally did. I went to rehab. I sobered up, and I finally left that toxic relationship. Broke me down so much as a person, but I finally broke up with him and then went to rehab. I just start working on myself. I realized that it all starts within me. It starts with my attitude. It starts with my mindset, and that I need to love who I am. I started going to therapy. I started getting on meds. I was doing so much self-love and self-healing and inner child healing. A year later, I'm on Bumble and I'm scrolling on this dating app, and I come across somebody's profile, and we start seeing each other, and after 2 years he proposes and I become his wife. A year after proposing, we decided that we do want to be parents. He is just a 2-month-old baby today. I'm sharing my story because when I was growing up, the things that mostly saved me were hearing stories like mine, hearing that I wasn't alone. And I think it starts with people like us, like who have gone through these things and are now saying, yeah, this is how I feel and this is how it's affecting how I am as a mother. And I think everybody should be able to acknowledge it because it only makes you better.